And for those of you I've not met, my name is Mike Shelah. I am the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Advantage Industries. I am also an ambassador with the Howard County Chamber. Our company has been a chamber member for many years. And right when COVID hit, we decided to become more involved. They welcomed me with open arms as an ambassador, and it's a role I truly embrace and enjoy. And I want to introduce my engineer extraordinaire, Russell Smith.
Hi,
Russell and I work with all of our new clients as well as our existing clients very candidly. Russell makes sure anything that I sell actually works.
Full-time job.
Today, we are going to discuss some of the things that a typical business should be doing to better protect not only their cybersecurity, their technology, their equipment, but really protecting your customers. So think about this. In the news just 48 hours ago, a major US pipeline was shut down by a hacker. Mm-hmm. And that made national news because it impacted millions of Americans. That's why it's on the front page of the news. But consider how many small businesses shut their doors just yesterday permanently because they were the victims of a cyber attack and they didn't have the money to pay the ransomware, pay the fines, pay for the audits, and it was just too much for them to overcome. So I'm going to ask a question. Would you knowingly do business with a company that accepts credit cards that didn't follow the cybersecurity guidelines for credit cards known as PCI? With that, I'm going to ask you a second question. Would you go to a doctor's office or a hospital or other medical facility that did not follow HIPAA guidelines, which is the medical cybersecurity guidelines? Well, I am sad to tell you the answer to both of those questions is yes, that you do it every day. A staggering 80% of small businesses do not follow cybersecurity guidelines. They've never had an external audit. Many don't even have a firewall. Now, Russell and I are going to talk about that. That's one of the many low-cost, no-cost solutions that you can do for your business to dramatically improve your cybersecurity. So with that, Russell, I've given the gloom and doom. Give us some hope.
Absolutely. I think one of the things to take away too from our talk today, we're going to give you 5, low cost, easy to implement security practices to make sure you're at least started. One of the hallmarks today, I think, in our talk is that nobody's too small. And that means you're not too small to be a target of hackers, and you're not too small to do things to take care of yourself and better protect your organization. And the tools have gotten cheaper, the tools are easier to use. You can be safe without spending massive amounts of money, and you need to be safe because you are a target. So.
Russell, you just made an excellent point for our audience. One of the myths that we often have to bust when we talk to a prospective client is they say, well, I'm too small, I'll never be a target. I agree with the second half of that you'll never be a target. Hackers rarely target. Even Target, when they were in the news a few years ago, they were not the target. Target was not the target of the hacking attempt. Mm-hmm. Their HVAC company was, because their HVAC company was targeted and hit. That impacted Target. Now, this HVAC company, I'm sure, had many other businesses as well, but it was Target that made the news because Target is Target. So when you think about this, think about it this way. A hacker is a criminal. If they had good work ethic, they would probably not be a criminal. Right. So they look for the easiest way to get information. And one of the simplest things they do is they go out on the internet and they look for an IP address that is not protected. And so Russell's going to walk you through some of the things that you can do to protect those IP addresses and other aspects of your technology.
So Like I said, thank you, Mike. These are all things today that are low-hanging fruit that have a dramatic security impact. So again, these are things that are not big time commitments to implement. They are not big cost commitments to implement, but they have dramatic impacts in terms of keeping your organization, your data, your staff safe. So what we're going to touch today is commercial grade firewalls with something called deep packet inspection, multi-factor authentication for email accounts, computers, key software, cybersecurity staff training and testing, because people are the weak link, and we'll get into that too. Windows, most of us have, servers have Windows Active Directory. There are a ton of security policies we can just turn on without spending a dime. And then drive encryption is hugely important too. If that laptop gets stolen from somebody's car, if they leave it on the metro, you don't want to worry about all the data that person has on that laptop. So these are things that, like I said, they're low-hanging fruit. We can do them quickly, we can do them fast, and they help keep you safe.
Russell, and I love your footnote too, because
yes.
we tend to assume that people are running some kind of antivirus, even if it's one of the freebies like Avast, or even I think Malwarebytes has a free version now, and
or Windows Defender.
Or Windows Defender.
Yeah.
So yeah, at least do that, or at least make sure you are.
This also goes to you Mac users as well. There are Mac viruses. There are getting to be more and more Mac viruses every month. So if you're on a Mac, you also need antivirus software.
Another myth
don't buy this myth at the Apple store. I've cleaned up several Mac viruses myself. So commercial grade firewalls. This is one of those things that, Mike, I love the assumption, because we used to assume that anybody we talked with would have a firewall. And it just seemed to be such a ordinary table stakes things to us. But we've talked with a lot of small businesses, and what they have is they have the Comcast or FiOS modem, and then immediately there's their network, their servers, their computers, all their data. And Comcast and FiOS modems, or any carrier modem like that, they have a very rudimentary firewall on them. So they do only the very most basic kind of random automated probes from the internet, and they'll keep those basic attacks off. But they're not capable of doing anything more than that. They're not capable, right? And they're not meant to, right? They're meant to be good enough for a home user. They're not good enough for commercial use. And you've got a lot more data to protect, a lot more sensitive data to protect. Firewalls are the first line of defense for your network, and all the traffic running in and out of your network is funneling through those. So they're going to block these opportunistic hacks. Commercial grade firewalls are also going to do things like inspect all the traffic going in and out. They have high-powered processors in them, and they actually look at the data being sent in and out of your office to look for viruses and malware. So if you have an employee that happens to, be browsing around, they go on the wrong website, they try to download a piece of software. If that's infected, the firewall is going to catch it, alert you to it, and prevent that download from happening. So that employee can't download the software anymore. They will get an error message from the firewall. We've gotten calls about this saying, hey, I keep trying to download this and I keep getting this message. And we're like, there's a reason you keep getting that message. This is not legitimate software. You're on the wrong website. So a good firewall will catch things like that. There are also a lot of nice, there are some workflow benefits and financial benefits to having a good firewall. A lot of people have been carrying fairly expensive services for the last year, like GoToMyPC, LogMeIn, remote access programs. They tend to be subscription based, and they're fairly expensive for what they are. Firewalls enable remote access, and it is more secure because you have full management and control over it. So firewalls, they either include remote access licenses, which is an encrypted scrambled connection, that is the secure socket layer, VPN, and typically that is a low cost or a one-time cost. So very often, and some of our larger clients, they've been able to completely pay for their cost of their firewall in about a year because of what they've saved from remote access licenses through services.
Russell, I want to round that point out a little bit, because one of the many myths that you and I hear when we talk to business owners is, well, aren't firewalls expensive? And the answer is they can be. But for a small company, and by small, I'm talking 50 employees and less, this can be a very, very modest investment.
Yeah, a firewall for a 300 megabit data connection and up to 200 employees is only going to run you about $1,000 these days.
That's a one-time expense, right?
As a one, you renew your security services every year, but that's hundreds of dollars. So it's not very expensive at all. And any organization should be able to get in there, and they scale. So larger companies, bigger firewalls, a little more expensive, but there's a whole spectrum to cater to your particular needs.
Yeah. Or your particular industry.
Yes, exactly. One of the other things I love is that most firewalls allow you to do a live internet backup or failover. So most of our clients are set up, if it's an important office, they've got a lot of staff there, downtime is money. Time that your staff can't access email, get on the internet, access, QuickBooks Online, that's costing you money. So a lot of our clients have a primary internet connection, then they have a cheaper backup connection. Maybe they have dedicated fiber, but they also have a little Comcast account or a 4G modem. Firewalls will automatically switch your office over to that backup if the primary internet goes down. Happens in 5 seconds. Your staff usually doesn't even notice. We get an alert on our help desk that, hey, the internet's offline, we'll fix that. When it fixes, everything switches back over. So they're big productivity gains and business continuity gains from a firewall too. One of the other things, like in terms of productivity, is firewalls do content filtering. So you can set them to block sites like Facebook or Netflix or Spotify that you don't want your employees on during the day. Or you can even block categories of sites. I don't want people, obviously looking at pornography. That's a standard setting that we deploy on our firewalls. So prevent your staff from going places they shouldn't be. You can always do exemptions for things too. So if the CEO needs to be on their Facebook, or the marketing person needs to be on Facebook because they're posting, you can do an exception for that person. And that's all controlled through the firewall. Reporting. This is great too. So if there are network problems, if there are speed issues on the internet, if a person's having connectivity issues, the firewall's logging all kinds of useful data too, and much easier to troubleshoot any kind of internal or external network areas with a commercial firewall than with, say, a Verizon modem or Comcast modem. The other thing firewalls do is that they can join multiple locations, multiple offices across a seamless network. So you have 3 offices. We've got clients with an office in Detroit and 2 in DC. They are all able to see the server drives. They're all able to see shared data. They all access it seamlessly. They all sign on the same way. And these offices are linked via secure, encrypted virtual private networks managed by firewalls at each office. So there are a lot of perks that you get, as well as security. And we always look for things like that at Advantage. What are the benefits in addition to security that can help you work better, more efficiently, more effectively, more reliably?
Hey, Russell, this reminds me of a prospective client you and I visited on site just a couple months ago. We really didn't know all the equipment that they had. So you went around the entire office and did a survey. And there was that one office. It was very small, but it had a Macintosh and it also had a Windows computer in it. And we looked at the owner and said, do you really have 2 people sitting in this office? It seems kind of small. He goes, oh, no. That's Mary. Mary works from a Macintosh, but we couldn't get this one thing to work. So we set up a Windows computer for her as well. We're like, wow, that's interesting. So Russell bent over to take a look at the computer and noticed that there was movement on the screen. He goes, hey, somebody's accessing this computer. And they said, yeah, Mary's working from home, so she's using LogMeIn. I said, wait a minute. So you have two computers for Mary in the office, in an office that she's not using. And then she's using LogMeIn to access private files so that she can work. And they said, yeah, is that a problem? Folks, the short answer to that is yes, that's a huge problem from a security standpoint, from a productivity standpoint, from a cost standpoint. They have two computers. They bought two computers for this employee when everything that they needed to do really could have been run on the Macintosh if they had just reached out and asked the right questions.
Right. Yeah. And you know, LogMeIn didn't work well on that, but the firewall access would have.
Oh, and this customer didn't have a firewall either. So had they had a firewall, it would have been much easier to implement that for them.
Yeah. Very important. Another one that we are pushing tremendously in the past year is multi-factor authentication. And email I mentioned specifically because the single biggest source of compromises that we see, the single biggest source of hacks that we have seen in people we talk with for the last probably 3 years is a compromised email account where the person is tricked into submitting information and basically tricked into handing over their credentials. We're going to get to that in a second. But let's say you have an employee that is tricked, that they get an email and it looks legit. It looks like a legitimate Microsoft communication and asks them to sign into their 365 account, sign in with their name, sign in with their password, and boom, now the hacker has access to their account. They can start churning through it, looking for data, looking for other people to contact. If you have one of those little codes, and you probably have this from your bank or another organization already, maybe your hospital, doctor's office, if they were set up to have a code sent to their phone, prompting for a multi-factor or two-factor authentication, the hacker would have been stopped dead in their tracks at that point. And we can see this. We've actually had clients tricked into handing data over, and that were set up with multi-factor authentication. We could hop on Microsoft servers and we could see people trying to sign in from Nigeria in the most recent case, and unable to do so because they did not have access to the person's phone. So yes, we still needed to reset their password, but there was no data access. They never got into the person's system. It is the single most effective thing you can do to protect your email accounts. Microsoft supports it. Google supports it. Most of the big business carriers do. We recommend you turn this on for your home accounts. If you use Gmail at home, turn on your two-factor. It is the single easiest, most effective thing you can do to protect that data.
And Russell,
it's pretty simple too these days, right? You can usually set it just a text message. So you don't need to install anything. You don't need to do anything fancy. If you can get a text message, you can use this.
a lot of these are not your direct fault, right?
Right.
You signed up for membership on fill in the blank website. You put in your email, you put in your password, and that company was breached.
Right.
One of the things that we talk to our clients about all the time is you have to have a separate username and password for every website that you're on. But the reality that we live in is most people don't do that. Maybe they have a couple of different passwords. But what the attacker will then do is they'll say, oh, look, we got a work email. This is Bob Smith at companyname.com. I bet you he uses this password for something at work. So why don't I start poking around? So the multi-factor authentication here protects you when you're completely unaware that somebody else has your data. Maybe you didn't do anything wrong. You know, maybe you didn't click on a bad link. Maybe somebody just got your information from a breach because that company didn't have good cybersecurity policies in place. This is a great way to protect yourself. It doesn't cost you a dime.
And we get a lot of pushback on this one, oddly enough. We get a lot of people say, oh, it's going to bother me all the time. It's too much. I don't want to do it. And part of it is I'm sitting here like, well, this could, I had a client who we've just started talking with, and they were phished 2 weeks ago for $90,000. They wire transferred $90,000 overseas, and they are probably not ever getting that money back. So I'm sitting here like, well, let's look at what amount of inconvenience is worth it, but it's not a lot. So I use the example here of Microsoft 365. If you are on the same computer and same phone, you're only going to get that prompt, so you don't get it every time you open Outlook, but you're going to get that once every 90 days. It should not be too inconvenient to type in a code every 3 months if it prevents you from being phished for $90,000. Even then, the only time you're going to need to enter it every time is maybe you're sitting down on a browser, maybe you're sitting down on somebody else's computer to check your email. You're going to enter that code, but it's easy, it's fairly painless, and it has a massive impact. It's built into things like Microsoft, so it doesn't even cost you anything other than the time it takes to turn it on. This is a nice dovetail into cybersecurity training for staff. And this has kind of been an interesting journey for us. So like I think a lot of tech companies, we've historically focused on technology, right? And technological solutions. So things like firewalls, and antivirus software. But one of the pivots that's happened probably in the last 5 years or so is that hackers have shifted as we've built better technology protection. So as we have more capable antivirus and firewalls and protections around networks, hackers started switching to tricking people. I like to say it doesn't matter how high we build the castle walls if somebody opens the gate from the inside. And that's really what hackers have shifted to. So now it's all about that phishing. It's about tricking people into handing over credentials, tricking people into installing a program on their computer that's giving them the hacker backdoor access. And so how do we educate your staff to be safe? We do that in a couple different ways at Advantage. So one is I do live classes for most of our clients once or twice a year. It depends on staff turnover. If it's a big company and there's high turnover, maybe I do that every quarter. But I'll come in and do a live webinar like this on here's some things that we see happening in terms of cybersecurity right now. Here are the types of attacks we're seeing used to trick people. And here are signs you can look for. Little things like, when you get that email, move your mouse pointer over that web link. If it's a and then look at the bottom of your screen. If it is a different URL, if it is a different set of words at the bottom of the screen versus the web link, that's a good indicator that this may be a trick. This may be, it doesn't match. So the web link says Microsoft. If you look at the bottom of your screen and it says, Microsoft or something, well, that's a really good indicator that this is a suspicious email. So we teach people little things like that. The other part is continuous education. People learn better and they retain it better if it is continually reinforced.
Repetition.
So, yeah. And so what we do for our clients is every month they get 2 emails. One is going to be a training and awareness video. And here's like the invitation that we send out. And so this is going to be 2 to 4 minutes, a little video, and then a 5 or 6 question quiz because people pay more attention if there's a quiz on a cybersecurity topic. We have over 300 different courses that we can push, so we can customize that for our clients' industry or things that they're worried about. But we also do a lot of general things, and we can also do things like physical security, letting people into the office. How do you do that? So this is very important. The other thing we do, and this is the fun one, is we send out fake phishing emails to our clients every month, and we see who gets tricked. We've tricked, it's been interesting. One time we caught the chief compliance officer for a company, and that was a pretty awkward conversation I had to have. But it's pretty effective. And the amazing thing to me, last part, yes, we also follow up every month. There are a lot of companies that do this training, and most companies in the industry, full disclosure, they're probably using like one of 2 or 3 different vendors to do these courses. we have discovered that the hardest part is making sure your staff actually takes the training classes. So we also do a monthly follow-up with all of our clients where we have a nice report. Here's who took the classes. And then we go back and say, okay, well, these 3 people, they didn't take it. Let's make sure they take the class this month. Let's make sure we're keeping them educated on the latest threats. Or if we had anybody fail the testing, we go back and look. It's been shockingly effective. I was honestly surprised the first time we started to do this. We ran this for a company of about 250 people. And the first time we sent out a fake email, we tricked 20 people into handing in their credentials, which is terrifying. Almost 10% of the company was easily tricked by us into handing over their logins. And really shocking. 6 months into this program, we don't have a single person getting tricked every month. People take it, they pay attention, they want to learn because people want to be safe. And these are tips that help them at home too, help them with the rest of their life, help them with their own personal accounts. So we've discovered that rather than being a burden, most of the people we work with are excited about this. They want to know these things. I love doing my live classes because I get really good questions from people. Too. So people are engaged, they're worried about this, and they want to educate themselves. Nobody wants to be the employee that puts the organization at risk.
Russell, I want to point out 2 great things about what you just described. And this is certainly not limited to Advantage Industries, though we tell our clients this all the time, is that this is very low cost. It's a couple of dollars per employee per month. So it's very expensive. And the training is generally, you do a great session with groups, but the monthly training is 5 minutes.
Less than 5 minutes.
It's a 2-minute video, and then you answer 3 or 4 questions,
right,
and you're done. But that, like you said, it's repetition.
Dramatic impact.
It has people thinking, and it lets us know where we really need to focus our attention to better support our clients.
Windows Active Directory security policies, and we put this in because it often gets overlooked. You know, a lot of organizations have a server either on-prem or in the cloud, or they're using something like Azure Active Directory. And there are a ton of available policies on your server that you can just turn on, again, without having to spend any money other than the time it takes to do this. That will make your organization instantly more secure. So one of the biggest ones is a password policy requiring complexity. So back in the day, and this is only 3 years ago, by the way, passwords were supposed to be like 8 characters and have numbers, letters, and symbols, and you're supposed to change them every 30 to 90 days. And that was the guidance. And NIST down in Gaithersburg, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, did a whole big study a few years back about password management and how people use them, and discovered that when you require people to change their password every 30 days, guess what? They can't remember it. And so what do? They take a little Post-it note, slap it, and write their new password on it, and they slap it right on their monitor. And everybody walking by can see this. I can't tell you the number of times that I have gone to do a sort of compliance review for a client and walked around the office ripping password Post-its off people's computers with their manager, by the way, but just going around and dozens of people, and I know their logins. And all I need to do, or like, guess what? Putting it underneath the keyboard doesn't work, folks. That's another one too, where I see all the time just this. So we look at screens, we lift up keyboards, and boom, boom, boom. So yeah, it didn't work. So NIST said, this isn't working. What do we do? And so a few years ago, they released new password guidelines. So they recommend longer passwords. They don't need to have crazy numbers and symbols, but they should be longer because that takes automated computing programs much longer to hack. It's an exponential growth, so that every character you add to a password makes it exponentially more complicated for any type of computer program or hacker to unlock that and brute force that. So what our kind of advice is these days is that, we should be 16. That's a lot to type. How do you remember it? Well, pick something that is easy for you to remember, but not something that people would easily guess about you. I like to say, pick a favorite. My tip is a favorite line from a movie, a book, a song that's meaningfully makes you laugh, something you remember. And that's a good password to use. You want to try to avoid using public information. Everybody does their dog. Well, if you have a Facebook account, I'm willing to wage you $5 that you mention your dog's name and your cat's name on your Facebook account. And people even know when you got your dog or cat because you probably posted photos of them as a puppy. So if your password is your dog's name and the year you got them, that's not a good password, because I can pretty easily take a guess at that. So I do recommend that. Currently, annual password resets is the recommendation, and that's a policy that we'd implement. Password failed attempts is very important, or lockout attempts. So if you have a resource that's online or somebody can log into, the account should be locked if they enter their password incorrectly too many times. And really, this is not designed to prevent human hackers. This is designed to prevent automated programs from hacking into your system. Like Mike said, hackers, like a lot of people, tend to be lazy. And so most of the hacking these days is done they set up computer programs to do most of the work for them. So they'll have a program to go try different combinations of users and passwords on a website. And they don't do anything. They tell the program to go and then they walk away. The program will notify them in, say, 3 days if it gets a successful combination. And then at that point, they'll actually sit down and maybe try to hack into your system now that they've got that access. So we want a policy on the computer that says, hey, if you have incorrectly entered a password more than 5 times within 15 minutes, we're going to lock your account for another 15 minutes, say. That's usually enough to discourage one of these automated programs. If it fails, if they're no longer allowed to lock in, the program's going to stop. The hacker is going to move on to the next target. And so that's again, an easy one that has a big impact. The thing I say is, my God, what if I just keep forgetting my password, I get locked out and I need to work? Well, you or your IT staff or your IT company can always unlock an account for you. And we've done this before many times too. So, the user will call in, we may have a passphrase with them, or we recognize who the user is, we know the computer they're calling in from, and we can unlock that account for them at that point, and then they can get in.
Russell, I want to point out real quick, I opened up the conversation today. I mentioned HIPAA, I mentioned PCI, and I think most business professionals have heard those terms before, but they're not familiar with NIST. And NIST is not new. It has actually been around for many, many years, and it's the great grandfather of all these compliance requirements. So HIPAA is NIST plus a bunch of other requirements. PCI is NIST plus a bunch of other requirements. So Russell and I will often meet business owners that say, well, I don't take credit cards and I'm not in the medical profession, so what guidelines should I follow? And the answer is NIST. Now, for perspective, NIST has 110 specific requirements, which they call controls, that show what good cybersecurity looks like. So think about that. There's 110 rules that your company probably aren't following, because every time Russell and I have run a NIST audit for a client, they score in the negative 200s. We have yet to have a client score a low positive number. Everybody has been in the negative 200s. So that should give you some perspective on the work that needs to be done, specifically for smaller business owners in those 200 employee or less category.
Absolutely, Mike. Yeah, and like I said, a lot of these things are some of it's low-hanging fruit, and so you start where you can, start where it has the biggest impact, and build out from there. Anything that you do is going to help your overall security picture. So start with the low-hanging fruit, work your way out. The more you do, the more secure you are. But that doesn't mean it's too big a project to take on. This one, the last one here, is one of my favorites. And I think Mike has a good story about this one. But to have an inactivity locking screen, this is especially important if you are a business to consumer organization. So if you have consumers in your store, in your office, who have easy access to your computer, having a, if nobody has moved the mouse, typed on the keyboard for 5 minutes, the login screen pops up again. The computer is locked. And that basically prevents that consumer walking by, sitting down and pulling up data on your computer and stealing information.
Yeah, Russell, thank you for that, because this is probably very typical for most people watching this presentation today. You go to the doctor's office, you sit in the waiting room, and then one of the nurses or an assistant comes out and says, all right, we're going to take you back to the exam room now. And they bring you into the exam room and they say, okay, the doctor will be in a minute. And 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, the doctor actually comes in to see you. Well, for 2 different doctor visits, one for my eyes and one for my back, I was left alone in the exam room for over 10 minutes in both scenarios. And both times, the computer that was there was unlocked, meaning if I wanted to, I could have plugged a thumb drive into there and I could have taken any data that I wanted, or I could have just looked around. Like let's say this was a good company that had the USB ports on their computers shut down so that you can't use a thumb drive. I still could have looked around at practically anything I wanted because the computers were unlocked and I had the access of whatever user had last used that computer, which was probably pretty good. It was probably a doctor.
Right. Yeah, so Mike's patient record was up, but there was nothing to stop him from pulling up any other patient record.
Yep.
For 10 minutes. So, and I've seen that before many times. This is huge. So again, we get some pushback here. Well, that's inconvenient. What is, I don't want to have to be logging back in all the time. And again, the corollary is the risk for losing patient data in this case, for somebody stealing patient data, the risk of a lawsuit, the risk of government fines, the risk of having your practice shut down. It's like, you can enter that password. Is really our stance, and you can adjust this. So you can adjust that inactivity period. So you can set the number of minutes that is right for your organization. I always like to say there is a trade-off between convenience and security most of the time. So a lot of this is finding what that right balance is for you that keeps you safe, but doesn't get in the way of your work, or doesn't get in the way of your work too much. But again, that's, usually this is just a matter of taking the time to turn this on and train your staff. Drive encryption is one of my favorites. We have had several times where a client, they've got employees with laptops and, went to a meeting, went somewhere, their car was broken into while they were inside at the meeting, and their laptop was stolen. With company data on it. And, historically, this is really bad. And I do get people to say, well, I've got a password on it, so I'm okay. You're not. Because the password, kind of protects when you turn on the computer. If you're an IT guy like myself or gal, you can pull the person's hard drive out of their computer or their solid state drive, plug it into another machine. I've got a nice little carrier to do that actually right here. I can plug it into another computer, and in 5 minutes, I have access to all your data. I don't need a password. My computer overrides that Windows or Mac login password. So how do you protect that? Well, you want to enable drive encryption for your computer. And again, the nice thing here, this is pretty easy, painless, and it's usually included on most business and commercial grade systems. So computers running Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise, or computers running the latest Mac OS X or 11 builds have drive encryption settings built in to the computer, and it's simply a matter of turning it on. Most business machines have a little custom chip on the motherboard called a TPM, or Trusted Platform Module, and that basically does a little handshake between the encrypted drive and the rest of your computer, so you don't even need an extra password. Your normal computer login through Windows or the Mac unencrypts the drive, lets you view it. But if I come along and I don't have your password and I try to pull that drive off and plug it into my computer, I'm told it's an encrypted drive and I can't read that data. This is great too for clients that are, say, HIPAA compliant medical practices. This is a requirement that you need to be doing this. And it is because you have to file breach reports if anybody steals a computer. This is the easiest breach report in the world, because all I need to say, I don't need to disclose what data was on the machine. I don't need to disclose who was using it. I don't need to fill out reams of paperwork. All I need to say on my HIPAA breach report is this computer was stolen on this and such date. It was protected by Windows 10 BitLocker. And that is the end of my breach report. So
Russell, this
love
slide
that.
brings up another critical cybersecurity component that I think a lot of businesses, frankly, choose to ignore because they don't want to make the investment. But if you have computers in your office that are not at least running Windows 10 or Apple OS X 11, you need to look at those and find out, okay, well, when is this one going out of support for Microsoft? Do I have 6 weeks? Do I have 6 months? Do I have 6 years? Because if it's not being supported any longer, if the operating system is old, jokingly, Windows XP,
Well, Windows 7 support ended in January of last year.
Yeah.
So if you're still using Windows 7, that computer is not only you can't do things like this to help protect yourself, it's not receiving security updates from Microsoft anymore. So every single month, there are more viruses that can attack this computer despite firewalls and antivirus protection.
Yep.
And every month it gets more risk because there's more danger out there for it. Is further behind in its updates.
So the smartest thing to do is look at where is your business. If you have 10 computers, let's use that as an example. Let's say 5 of them are on Windows 10 and the other 5 are Windows 7 or Windows XP. You want to go, okay, well, how quickly do we want to replace these? We would recommend that you do it ASAP if they're all in that category. But have a conversation with whoever's supporting your IT and say, okay, when did these non-Windows 10 machines go out of support? Because we want to look at starting to replace those as quickly as possible.
And I think the thing too is I think there's still there are a lot of folks, especially who, were growing up with computers in like the 80s and 90s, who still look at computers as inherently, or at least subconsciously, as very expensive. The technology is the expensive thing, and so they avoid making updates and replacing it because it's seen as this big expense. Computers are not, even business grade computers are not terribly expensive these days. A business grade desktop with a 3-year on-site warranty is, a typical one is well under $1,000. So what is expensive though is employee time and your data. The biggest assets of your organization for most of us these days are the data you have. And protecting that data is way more valuable than an individual computer or two. The other thing is obviously new computers are going to help your staff work more quickly, more efficiently. It's going to be more reliable. It's less likely to cause an interruption to their work. So good point, Mike. Thank you. So where do we go next? So what we've talked about a lot today is about preventing hackers from getting onto your systems and getting access to your data. But we have a kind of philosophy, and I think most IT and security companies are going to see this too, is that you do everything you can to prevent bad actors from getting into your network, but you have to operate on the assumption that it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when a hacker will get onto your network, and you plan accordingly. So I'm borrowing this. This is one of the companies that's a friend that we work with, and he likes using the metaphor of home security. And he said, so what we've been looking at mostly today, firewall, antivirus, security policies, drive encryption, think of that as sort of the perimeter security, the prevention layer of home security. So that is, a lock on your door and your windows, keys, things like it's to prevent people from getting in. He said, but no system is perfect. And this is true for IT security as well. You can't predict every single way that somebody could get into your house. Maybe there's a small window up in the attic which is unlatched, and you never even have been up there to check it. Maybe there's something in the basement. So what do you do if somebody gets in? How do you detect that happened? And that is sort of moving on to the next step. So let's say you've done our 5 things. Now you want to start upping your game and look at what do we do to detect it if somebody gets in, and how do we stop it, and how do we detect it quickly? So one of our big things now is managed detection and response, or MDR. And that is programs and tools, and they're typically programs running on each person's computer and all the servers in your organization, as well as integrating with things like Gmail or 365 to look for unusual patterns in activity. Hackers are systematic, like most people, in that they have tools and techniques that they use. They have procedures that they tend to follow when they get into a system. So a very good example is somebody gets into an email account. One of the first things the hacker will do is set up rules to cover their tracks. So if they're going to be sending out phishing emails to other people in your organization, or God forbid your clients, asking for payment, we've seen that before too. They're going to set up rules to say, when I send an email with this subject, automatically delete it. So that means that when you look at your sent folder, you won't see this weird email that you don't recognize. So this MDR software is going to look for those types of patterns, those types of rules being set up on email accounts or on computers to cover tracks. And it's going to flag and alert that, or it's going to say, when a hacker gets on a computer, they're going to install usually several different computer programs to help them explore and penetrate further into the network. So an MDR tool is going to say, hey, these are not good programs being installed on this computer. And wait a minute, why are these programs being installed at 2 a.m. on this computer? That's another, or why is somebody logging into this computer from Italy when nobody has ever logged into your computers from anywhere outside of the US before? So these sorts of programs look for this activity, and then it flows to the Security Operations Center, which is staffed by people. And so we'll get an alert and says, hey, this is happening. What do you want to do? And usually at that point, 2 a.m, somebody's, signing into their email from overseas without notifying anybody and setting up rules. We're going to freeze that account and just lock it down. They're not allowed to log in. They're not allowed to send or do anything. They're going to open a ticket with us and our client. So when we get in the morning at 9 o'clock, we're going to say, hey, we locked down Mike's account because of unusual activity. Do you want us to open an investigation? Do you want us to look into that? And then security information and event logging looks for, keeps records of all this data. So if there is some kind of breach, your insurance company, the FBI, and with some of these wire transfers, they can go back and really drill down to who got in, how did they get in, what is the report we file. And I'll leave with the nice thing is this past year has really pushed the industry forward. Many more people need these tools. And so this type of tool set used to be in the price range of Fortune 1000 companies. And what has happened in the last 6 months, 12 months is, this is great with technology. This is why I love technology. It democratizes over time. It gets easier to use. It gets easier to access. It gets more affordable. So now you can be a 5-person law firm and have access to these tools at, for a small monthly fee, rather than having to pay $100,000 for a massive SIEM and MDR tool, which would have been the case as little as 2 years ago. So you're not too small to be safe. And I think that's the biggest takeaway here, if I had to leave anything.
And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money either.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important thing. Is there is an investment here, there is an expense, but when you compare that to a breach, or the cost of a breach, or even just disruption in your ability to do your job, I like to say to customers, what is your annual revenue? Okay, so now back that annual number down to a monthly number, and then back that monthly number down to a weekly number, and then back that weekly number down to a daily.
Mm-hmm.
So your company makes $1,000 a day, $2,000 a day. All right, so how many hours could you be unable to work before it really starts to cut into your bottom line? Mm-hmm. The answer is not many.
Right.
And that's before you get into the fines and the auditing fees that are imposed upon you. And now you have a deadline because you must have it done within a certain time, because there's a third-party auditor that is mandating that you do these things. If you're proactive, the expense is much lower, the process is much simpler, and you dramatically reduce the risk of having to pay large fines, and you increase the chance of your company surviving.
Yeah, if you can prevent one ransomware infection, and ransomware infections, it depends on how you're set up and how good your backups are, and the type of breach. But ransomware infections usually take a company down for at least 24 hours. So think about how much work you could be doing in that time, how much you're paying that staff for those 24 hours. So if you can prevent one ransomware infection, typically these products have already paid for themselves. It also is a good thing that I have clients that make sure to let their clients know they're doing these things. They make sure to let their clients know they're using NIST standards or they're using PCI standards as a reassurance that we care about your data, customer. And we focus on this, and it is very important to us, and it's an asset. I have clients that use logos for compliance standards on their websites to reassure their customers. So this can also be a marketing benefit and help build trust as well.
Well, Russell, as always, a brilliant job today. You really brought it. Some great content. Thank you so much for putting this together. And Morgan and Leonardo and Alex, thank you so much for having us and further perpetuating our partnership with the Howard County.
And you can see right here at the bottom, we love to get questions. Obviously, I think you can tell that both of us like to talk. So if you have any questions about security, IT, anything, just shoot us an email at answers@getadvantage.com, and we'd love to chat with you.
Yeah, answers without a sales pitch. We truly want to help first.
Yep.
Thank you guys so much. And are there any questions? I know we only have a few minutes, but if there are any questions that we have, we can certainly ask those now while we have a few minutes.
I actually had a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I guess my question would be, sometimes let's say that you suspect that something weird is going on, like there's either an infection or just something, suddenly something pops up that you had no idea, that what's your first step to kind of after that happens?
So I am a big fan. Trust your gut. And this is advice. This is physical safety, right? This is what we're taught in terms of if you have a bad feeling about a situation or where you are, you get out of there. You trust your gut. And I kind of follow the same rules in IT. So if you have a gut feeling that says something is weird here, I don't like what it is, go with that. We would always rather have our clients, and we actually, we give all our clients little, mouse pads and everything with our contact number on there. We always tell folks, like, we would rather have you call in with this feels weird and it be nothing than the opposite. Because we have had clients that say, I had a really bad ransomware infection for a large company with over 100 people, and it turns out that the person who got it had noticed some weird things on their computer, didn't know what it was, and said, you know what, it's 5 o'clock, I'm sure it'll be fine tomorrow, and logged off and left their computer for the day. And if they had called us at that point, their computer would have been the only one infected. By the time we all got in the next day, the server was infected and several other machines were infected. So we kind of say, you know, if you have a gut feeling, call your IT staff, you know, or call somebody to come in and take a look, you know, go with that gut feeling, and better safe than sorry.
Yeah. Every now and then you just have something you're just like, I don't know what's going on, but it
Yeah.
just isn't-
Yeah.
there's
And
something-
like I said, we're always happier to tell you, hey, you know, that's just this little thing, don't worry about it. We'd rather be safe.
Okay.
Good question.
Thanks.